Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
As we talk about that, I mean, you've had so much experience organizing people to do things. When you talk about, I guess, liberation in just kind of a larger sense, and just trying to have that freedom and bring that to other Black folks in other areas of the country and abroad as well, what does liberation mean to you? What does that look like to you?
Well, I'll tell you a little story that is about the history of me coming along. I was a citizen of the Republic of New Africa when I was 28 years old. And the Republic of New Africa was a movement during the Civil Rights era where we didn't think that it was enough and we could trust the government to think that we could have our freedom and independence. Mm-hmm. And that really we needed to draw a line in the sand and talk about reparations and independence because we didn't trust what the government would do for us. And we really thought that having been kidnapped from Africa, brought here, and had the wealth of this country built on our backs, that we demand reparations and independence and, in fact, sovereignty across the Black Belt South. So I was a part of that movement. And my name then was Yusufu Soni Biata, my free name. Joe Brooks, I hate to say, is a slave name, but I am Joe Brooks. We planted the red, black, and green flag in the Mississippi Delta. And I was able to join that effort because of my own upbringing, and that is, there's strength in numbers. There's strength in numbers, and that if you come together with like-minded folks that could have each other's back, there's a lot that you could accomplish. And so I was about that, and we did a lot. And in fact, it also led to me ending up going back to the South professionally for 13 years when I was invited to be the president of the Emergency Land Fund, which was a nonprofit that exists to this day after having merged with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives to save Black-owned land in the Black Belt South. And so, you know, I'm really about and was raised to think about being independent. Black communities ought to be able to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, depend on one another, turn that dollar over as many times as you can to increase the wealth and position and opportunity for Black folks. And that's what I did by helping African Americans save their land from Mississippi to the Sea Islands and off of South Carolina. And that was quite an experience. And that all came from, I'm convinced, with the orientation and the education that I got growing up, the family that I had and the community that I had in South Berkeley.
Wow. I'm just very curious. Can you talk more about just that experience of actually helping Black folks secure land or keep the land that they may already be in their family? Like, what were some struggles or conflicts that you ran into?
Okay. So, when you have some time, Google Joe Brooks, the Emergency Land Fund. But here's what it basically comes down to. There was never 40 acres in a mule. Mm-hmm. It was granted, but then snatched away by President Johnson after Lincoln's death. Mm-hmm. The Freedmen's Bureau did not issue any land opportunities to African Americans, but African Americans on their own account after slavery were able to accumulate over 20 million acres of land by 1910. 20 million acres of land. Now understand the symbolism of land in the South. That's a source of independence and not having to depend upon white folks. So imagine the reaction of white folks being able to, Black folks being able to be independent and not having to depend on them and asking permission of them to do what they wanted to do with their lives. So it was a struggle for African Americans to accumulate the land that they accumulated. And this also meant that the federal government was in cahoots with local whites in terms of the agencies that were supposed to be benefiting all, like the United States Department of Agriculture and the Farmers Home Administration that makes loans to farmers. Blacks were discriminated against, undermined, and when they did get loans, it was $1 short and a day late. So African Americans accumulated land against tremendous odds. This 20 million acres in 1910 has dwindled down to just over 10 million acres or less now because of the undermining of and the viciousness of speculators and developers and discrimination of government agencies, including the land-grant colleges that are supposed to be responsive to rural and agricultural interests of families. All of these things were obstacles that we fought against when I was there for the 13 years. And I do think that there had not been an emergency land fund that I was a part of that merged in 1986 with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, there would be little or no African-American owned rural property today. The other huge problem that we were addressing, imagine this, imagine a family accumulating land like I've described. The principal owner in the family dies without a will. The family, some of the family members begin to migrate to Chicago and up south to Philadelphia and New York. That means that their property has undivided interest, what they call heirs property, which means that speculators and criminals and thieves, white folks mainly, would identify these folks that had this undivided interest in Chicago, knock on their door and say, for example, I'll give you $1,000 for your interest in your Mississippi property. Not knowing any better, that Chicago resident, that Chicago relative needing $1,000 sells their interest. That developer goes to court in Mississippi and demands that their interests be divided, and therefore the court orders a petition, a public sale of the property so that that individual can get their piece. That public sale, you can imagine, goes to whom? It goes to the highest bidder and not to the black folks that originally owned the land. And so that's been another huge ripoff that we have been fighting against and fight against to this day. We were able to establish, at least in Alabama, a legislative bill that resulted in, if this happens, a property for sale because it was heirs property and being sold in public auction, the existing heirs would have the first right of refusal in terms of the sale of that property. At least if we had some money, we could bid on what was already owed us and belonged to us to outbid, if we could, that white speculator or thief. I used to call them just thieves. So that meant we were raising money to be able to compete compete in the sale of property that already belonged to us. And so it was a vicious cycle.
Wow.
So that's one example of some of the things that we did and we're up to. And that was a hell of an experience.
Yeah, and there's so much undermining that happens to happen, and you have to go through all the paperwork and just check things. That's very rigorous to do. And unfortunate that it's even something that you had to focus on for so long that, you know, as you mentioned, all these other obstacles, not just on a local level, but being undermined from the federal government as well. In those aspects, that's a lot of different forces just working against you.
There's one other thing that I'd like to add about the value of black land ownership in the rural South, especially during the 60s and 70s and the civil rights era. People registering people to vote, people who were threatened with being going to jail. Property owners, landowners were the ones who could provide them with shelter, and often would show up to pay their way out of jail. Because land, being the value that it is, it's a security base and a source of wealth that allows you to be independent of the system. And so that's another source.
That's a good point. And what would you say would be either top 3 things that you found were maybe the most harmful to the black community? You just mentioned how integration changed the economics of the neighborhood.
I think probably one of the most harmful is lack of self-love. You know, if you love your brothers and sisters like you love yourself, you wouldn't want to do as much harm to them. And then Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of Black Men. And Lord knows we have been miseducated to the utmost, to the point where we don't like each other. But, you know, when you travel in the South, you know, black folks try to put the South down, but the historically black colleges have done a great job in educating folks. Unfortunately, it's kind of like Nigeria. You know, Nigerians come here, get educated, they don't go back home. They stay here. Black folks from the South get educated, you know, some stay, but a lot of them venture out because it's greener. I don't blame folks want to leave, but they're leaving a place that really nurtured them. That's one of the reasons why my wife and I, we're going to relocate. We're moving to Florida next month.
Oh wow, very soon. Very soon. Okay.
Yeah.
You got your place picked out. Well, just speaking about that, what would you say, being black, what does that mean to you in America right now in 2021? What is that? Has your perception of that changed over the years, or how do you feel about that? Just
being black. Yeah. You know, it's something that requires, again, having self-love will help you persevere through some of the, hopefully give you compassion to want to work with as we persevere through some of these changes. You know, I'm old enough to recall how, you know, the different civil march for rights walks and stuff, how we thought things were going to change. But it seems like what has changed the most is the conservative white folks have figured out another way to refuse opportunity. You know, you look at Oakland, and not just Oakland, inner city schools, they aren't that great. You know, so be willing, you know, that's one of the things that I try to do as a person, is to volunteer to help, you know, work with folks, doing what I can to help them lift up so that our communities can be stronger. You know, we have some very talented young folks in our communities. Unfortunately, they want to not work hard and get paid. So that's.
how do you think we can fix a lot of these issues that are in our communities that you're talking about?
People like you, myself, volunteering our time to share what we know and learn with other folks. You know, that's how I met my wife, through volunteerism.
Oh wow.
I tell folks, you know, even if you're trying to learn a new craft, you know, you volunteer, you do something that you're not familiar with, and next thing you know, you have a few hours in it, you can add that to your resume. You know, so, but it requires the foresight to do something with the understanding you're not going to get paid, but with the expectation that you're going to be able to use that knowledge. And I think that's part of what stymies some people, you know, because they don't want to do anything unless they get paid. Yeah, and so that's something, a workaround that we will have to. And I understand in some cases, well, in all cases, people need to have a standard of living.
Yeah.
And And I feel like I'm just running my mouth.
Oh no, we're here to hear from you.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you think would be, I guess, the maybe top 3 things that you think have been the most harmful to our community? It maybe either recently or something you've just noticed. And there's no particular order.
Yeah,
just-
yeah. Let me give that a little thought. I would have to say that the number one harm to our community has come from the steady decline in public support for public schools and the incursions that charter schools have made into the fiscal pot of public education. I think it's extremely not in our interest. I think the second thing I would point out is the lack of affordability of housing. I mean, that's just a community killer. It absolutely is. We do have now, more, a more extended, community of diversity in the Bay Area. Like we have significant black populations in Antioch, places like that. Black officials elected in Antioch. But they're up against some very difficult politics there as well. Terrible policing. If you think we got bad policing in Oakland, I mean, these people in places like Antioch are terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying.
Wow.
The way they treat young kids, like hardened criminals. Stopping them on their bicycles, kids riding bicycles, taking them down to the police station, making their parents come and get them. This is going on right now in Antioch.
Wow.
They killed somebody within the last couple of months by, kneeling on the person's neck after, right in the middle of the George Floyd trial. I mean, this is how vicious the political environment is. I mean, these people think they can get away with this, and we're stuck in the middle of it. What can I say? And it's an active fight going on right now. And again, we'll see how it unfolds.
Yeah, definitely in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Do you see any solutions from even some of the issues you're mentioning? Affordability, just how much that's changed the landscape for things, public
Yeah.
schools,
I really have a hard time doing any kind of financial projections. Like I'm kind of in a state of disbelief over this huge budget surplus that California has. Where the hell did that come from? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Millions of people lost their job, and we're rolling in money. So it's a little over my head in that respect. And because I expected a lot more financial difficulty and hardship by now, and we're still dealing with the deferral of rent that apparently got extended another couple of 2 or 3 months, but that's going to come to an end, and how that's going to get resolved. I mean, I just don't. I can't put together a picture of a solution. I just see it chaos at this point, and I don't know how it's going to get resolved.
well, there's definitely a lot to still be worked on as we go through this year and coming out of this pandemic, or at least having things open back up in California.
Yeah.
And just having these conversations, and just from your experience, what would you say are maybe the top 3 most harmful things you've seen happen, I guess, in the black community or to the black community?
I think one of the biggest things that tore us apart, believe it or not, is the civil rights legislation.
Really?
Yes, because we then saw the opportunity and thought that the white man's ice water was colder than our own. And the black Wall Streets that we had, we began to go outside of ourselves. We spread ourselves too thin. It led to the opportunity for divide and conquer.
Gotcha.
We forgot about where we came from. We forgot about what was important. And so I've said that, and it shocked a lot of people that I would say that. You know, I don't champion segregation, but I don't also applaud it, and I'm not. I don't think that it has done what it was intended to do, and I think as I think back on it, when I remember when it happened, I used to be in discussions about what capitalism was doing and not doing for us, which it wasn't doing very much. I've been in my own thinking a democratic socialist for most of my adult life anyway. And so I really thought then that when desegregation happened, I was hoping that we would hang as a community, but I was wrong. Again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it did undermine our cohesiveness that we had going when we started wanting to go to the suburbs. And we weren't liked in the suburbs, but we still thought that their ice water was colder than our own. That's just my metaphor for it.
Oh, understood. No, I get it. No, I definitely, it's a lot there. And what do you think, as you're mentioning this, like you said earlier, you talk with your family, and one of the questions outside of identifying the problem was, what are we going to do about it? And what you were just mentioning from just kind of that divide and conquer tactic that you've seen play out, and just even from those of capitalism and how that's impacted black folks. What would you say is, I guess, maybe a way to fix some of these bigger issues, or ways clearly you've been working on that in terms of the black land ownership and things of that. Is there other things you thought of in terms of fixing and for the community?
Each one teach one. Those of us who know better need to share what we know, and we haven't done that. One of the values that I see in the Brotherhood of Elders Network is that when you begin to think about the talent that we have and the intergenerational connection that represents, we're a gold mine. So how do you use that gold? How do you use that gold? And I think that that's where we are, and that's the excitement that I have with the Brotherhood. But to be more fundamental, you have to begin with where the problem starts. And it begins with education. It begins with education. If we do not organize and pay attention to ourselves around what's happening with education, if we don't show up and have the kind of presence and investment in the education of our kids, and in the education of poor kids especially, and the capacity and the lack of capacity that the parents of poor kids have, and how they have to be surrounded as well, we're going to continue to lose out. It starts there. It starts there. And so just take Oakland, for example. We've got African Americans on the board. Right. They need to be challenged. They need to be educated. They need to be aligned with the interests and what needs to happen in Oakland more generally for the kids in those schools to benefit and to be able to grow and prosper. So it starts there. It starts with education. Then it starts, and then that expands itself into ownership. We have to begin to own and to see ourselves owning solutions and being accountable for the actions that we take to own. And so I think we're beginning to think about that. It's about wealth building. It's about wealth building, and then it's about leveraging that wealth to create opportunity and institutions for a broader mix of African Americans who've been left behind, who will no longer be left behind. That's my sort of like theory of change. Now, that's not an overnight thing.
Right.
That's a generational, intergenerational challenge. So,
It's definitely something we're still dealing with. Now, living in these different areas from Gary, Indiana, living in Los Angeles, having friends, family throughout LA, and then moving to the Bay, there's a lot of different experiences kind of from each different place, going
Yes,
from like
sir.
a really tight-knit community to, especially LA, as well known for, whether it's dealing with the gangs or everything else, but very much specific communities that, have either grown up together or have been torn apart from gentrification or all these other different factors. And I'm curious, in your opinion, what would you say would be like maybe the top 3 things that have been the most harmful, you think, in the Black community?
I think the first thing, Brother Spencer, for me would be us not loving each other enough, man, or caring about ourselves enough. That's a real big problem that I see, that self-hatred and just falling into the status quo of not progressing. And that's one of the things. The second thing is not being serious enough about addressing the issues that are really impacting us. We've kind of fallen into, well, this is how it is. And I think it's just a small percentage of us that are really, really fighting to overturn this status quo that has kept us locked down for so long, man. And so that would be number 2. And number 3, I think just the systemic racism of the history of this country, man, and how it's impacted every area of our lives, man. And so going back to the first and second thing, we just haven't, in my opinion, haven't adapted hard enough, man, to get this stuff off of us, man. And we going since 1619, man, and it's just, those are the 3 areas that I would hope that we need to address and work on a little bit more, man.
Do you see, or have you thought about, I guess, any solutions to the problems you're just mentioning, like loving yourself more, having self-love, and as you mentioned, and just kind of not falling into a lot of these other, I guess, traps and things that certainly happen to a lot of us?
I think an area that we can improve on ourselves, man, is knowing our history a little bit more, or in terms of the contributions that we've made as human beings on this planet, let alone Africans in this continent. I think that our young people in our community at large just needs to know a little bit more about and take pride in what we've accomplished in spite of, man. Every time I'm in contact with a group of young people, I try to throw some history at them and then go back and check this out a little bit more. Because you look at this, what happened then, and you can see what's happening now. But if you have no clue of what's happening or what happened previously, of course you're gonna make the same mistakes. But if you don't know, you can't adapt. So I'm always emphasizing know our history a little bit more, man, and know just how capable we are as human beings, man. In spite of whatever kind of madness has been coming at us, we're still here. But I think that if we can do that on a larger scale, that can help us address those other 3 issues that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hear that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you.